Polar bears are the only bear classified as a marine mammal by most countries within its range. These ranges include the US, Norway, Greenland, and Russia. Polar bears top the food chain in the Arctic, where they feed primarily on seals. They reach these seals from a platform of sea ice. Seal fat has the most calories in the Arctic. Anything else does not support its caloric intake and does not properly feed them. An important ecological niche is that they prevent the overpopulation of seals. Polar bears have no other predators besides humans. They evolved from the common brown bear ancestor. They split up circa 6 million years ago to adapt to the frozen seas of the far north. One may ask how a polar bear would survive. Polar bears are designed for the Arctic climate, where winter temperatures can plunge to negative 45 degrees Celsius, which is negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Polar bears are insulated by 2 layers of fur that keep them warm. When they're in good body condition, they also have a thick fat layer. Their compact ears and small tail also prevent heat loss. Their feet are furred and covered with small bumps to keep them from slipping on the ice. Their sense of smell is powerful for detecting seals, and their claws can haul out a 40 to 90 kilogram, which is 150 to 200 pound seal from the water. Polar bears live in the Arctic. They are most abundant in areas with annual sea ice and large ringed seal populations, since that is their food source. Why are polar bears important? First and foremost, they are adorable. They are also at the top of the food chain and play an important role in the overall health of the marine environment. Over thousands of years, polar bears have also been an important part of the cultures and economics of the Arctic peoples. Polar bears depend on sea ice for their existence and are directly impacted by climate change, serving as an important indicator species as well. Polar bears are vulnerable species. According to polarbearsinternational.org, polar bears are listed under a variety of classifications depending on international, national, and regional regulations. Internationally, they are listed as a vulnerable species by the IUCN. In Russia, polar bears are classified as a Red Data Book species, a listing that includes animals considered rare or endangered. In the US, polar bears are listed as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act. Canada considers polar bears a species of special concern under the National Species at Risk Act. However, in all cases, the primary conservation concern for polar bears is habitat loss and the reduced access to their seal prey due to climate change. In the 1960s and 1970s, commercial and sport hunting was their biggest threat. The 1973 Agreement on the Conservation of the Polar Bear was signed and also on November 15th of that year by Canada, Denmark, Greenland, Norway, the US, and Russia. It was the first time the 5 polar bear nations had come together on a shared wildlife conservation issue. It remains one of the strongest multilateral and environmental agreements ever signed. Currently, the main concerns are habitat loss, reduced access to their prey due to climate change, commercial activities, pollution, disease, inadequate habitat protection, and potential for overharvest. Climate change is not just about polar bears. It is also the iconic symbol of a melting Arctic. And here comes the preaching. It has a major impact on people too, with effects that will intensify unless we reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I had to throw that in there. What's causing climate change? Greenhouse gases through burning fossil fuels like coal and deforestation due to less trees absorbing carbon dioxide. And how exactly does this affect polar bears? Polar bears evolved for their cold, icy habitat. They rely on this habitat to get their food and catching their prey. With the Arctic Sea dissolving due to the Earth warming, it's close to destroying the Arctic ecosystem. For polar bears, they will experience reduced access to food, drop in body condition, lower cub survival rates, increase in drowning, increase in cannibalism, loss of access to denning areas, and all leading to the potential extinction in the polar bear. Let's talk about their habitat loss. Sea ice loss from climate change is a major threat. They rely on ice for not only capturing their prey, but for traveling and breeding. With pollution in polar bears in some parts of the Arctic can carry surprisingly high loads of toxic chemicals. Wind and ocean currents transport these pollutants to the Arctic. Polar bears absorb these higher levels when they eat the seals. According to polarbearinternational.org, most polar bears sampled to date show signs of chemical contamination to some degree. But polar bears in the Barents Sea, Northeast Greenland, and the Kara Sea appear to be the most affected for certain well-known chemicals and chemical groups. For example, DDT, PCB, and brominated flame retardants. Even young cubs carry pollutant loads absorbed from their mother's milk. How will this affect them? Well, according to polarbearsinternational.org, so far scientists have learned that the chemical cocktail found in any polar bear is complex, consisting of up to 200 different compounds. Pollutants can affect the bear's hormonal system, including hormones essential to their growth, reproduction, and metabolism. Contaminants have been found to cause shrinking genitalia in polar bears and weaken bones. Overall, this could affect their reproduction and general health. Vitamin levels appear to be affected too, as are some aspects of skull bone structure. A high load of contaminants may also suppress the polar bear's immune system, affecting their ability to fight off disease. Certain toxins at high enough levels may affect the polar bear's nervous system and thus potentially their cognitive skills. For diseases in polar bears, the most common parasite is Trichinella, but the biggest concern is more pathogens that will be introduced by changing disease vectors or pathways in a warming Arctic. Some of these changes can be increased human activity in a warming Arctic, for example, sewage disposal, and the migration of lower latitude species to the far north as higher temperatures change habitats and distribution patterns. How else do humans affect polar bears? Well, today legal harvesting continues on a limited basis for indigenous peoples. It is important to note that this does not make them bad people. These hunts have long been an important part of their cultural traditions and provide important nutritional benefits in some regions. Current legal harvest of polar bears is between 600 and 800 bears per range wide. That represents 3 to 4% of the estimated total population of about 20,000 to 25,000 animals and is considered sustainable in most areas and in most years. Harvest quotas are based on the best available information at the time. Since melting ice caps lead to polar bears spending more time on shore, they have more interactions with humans. This typically results in a sad ending for either a human or more usually the bear. Industrial impacts are also very important to note. According to World Wildlife Foundation, offshore petroleum installations and operations in the Arctic are expected to increase in number. This expansion would likely affect polar bears in their habitat in many ways. This includes the following. Contact with spilled oil would be fatal. An oil spill would affect the entire food chain. Noise generated from onshore and offshore oil operations would cause disturbance. Increased Arctic shipping represents a risk to polar bears. As traffic by barges, oil tankers, and cargo ships in Arctic waters increases, so do the risk of oil spills and human disturbance to polar bears. So with all this, what is being done? We are now monitoring the population, teaching people not to kill the polar bears and take a non-lethal course of action instead. We are addressing climate change, reducing industrial impacts, and groups and foundations are dedicated to helping the polar bear. And what can we do? Well, humans caused this problem, so we can fix it. Now get ready for another preach. We can greatly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. If we start now, we can start to see the positive effects in about a decade or so. We can save not only the polar bears, but the entire Arctic ecosystem. And we can also make it a point to not hunt them illegally.